I turned my husband's affair into a trap. Firefighters had to intervene. I got into my husband's car and found a tube of personal lubricant in the glove compartment. I didn't say a word. I just secretly replaced it with industrial super glue. What happened next forced our neighbors to call the fire department. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far my story of revenge has traveled. I sat at the kitchen table, the silence in the house as thick as morning fog. That silence had become a constant, unwelcome guest. The old clock on the wall, our wedding gift from my late mother, ticked with a relentless, accusing rhythm. Each beat reminded me of a life I was beginning to suspect had been a beautiful, meticulously crafted lie. Julian, my husband, had just returned from yet another of his countless business dinners. He looked not only exhausted but haunted, like a man carrying the weight of a secret too heavy to bear. His face was etched with new lines of fatigue and guilt, lines that hadn't been there before. He tossed his jacket on the sofa with a weariness that felt rehearsed, loosened his tie like it was a noose he was desperate to escape, and collapsed onto the bed without even bothering to shower. The faint scent of his expensive cologne lingered in the air, but it was mixed with something else, a sweet floral perfume that didn't belong in our home. It felt like an intruder, a confession whispered by someone who wasn't me. A few minutes later, the gentle hum of his snoring filled the house, a sound that once brought comfort but now felt like mockery, a lullaby for a fool. I got up quietly, moving with the practiced grace of a wife of 40 years, and began tidying the living room, his jacket, his wallet, his phone, his old laptop. The phone screen was still lit, a new email glowing like a sinister omen. Julian never used email. He always said, "Juliet, all this tech stuff is too complicated. I'd rather just make a call." But there it was, an email right in plain sight. Curiosity, morbid but irresistible, pushed me to open it. The message was short, just a few words that shattered my world. "You were incredible tonight, Dad." The red heart pierced my chest like a knife. I froze, staring at the screen, my breath caught in my throat. Dad? Who was calling him that, and in such an intimate, affectionate tone? My hands trembled as I scrolled for more, but there was nothing. Just a strange, cryptic email address, nonsense characters, offering no answers. A chill ran through me, not from cold, but from the kind of fear that seeps into your bones. It felt like a crack had opened in the door of my life, revealing a secret world I was never meant to see. I glanced toward the bedroom. Julian had turned over, snoring softly, his face peaceful, a cruel contrast to the storm raging inside me. My heart pounded like a thief's. I quickly put the phone back, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I went on cleaning, movements now mechanical, robotic. I gathered his dirty clothes for laundry and checked his pant pockets. Inside one, I found a folded piece of paper, crisp and new. It was a restaurant receipt from a fancy steakhouse in San Antonio, dated that very night. I frowned. San Antonio? He had told me he was meeting partners in Dallas. A bitter laugh escaped me. Julian hated driving to Dallas. San Antonio, though, that was different. That was where his late mother had lived. He'd often spoken of his fond memories there. But who had he dined with in San Antonio while lying about being in Dallas? The receipt said party of two, a bottle of expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, the same wine he bought for our 10th anniversary, and main courses of filet and pasta. I tried to remember the last time he'd taken me somewhere like that. Maybe 10 years ago, when I opened my first bakery. I could still see the flickering candlelight, his proud smile, the way he toasted to my success. Now that memory felt like a lie, a faded photograph in a scrapbook of deceit. I pulled out my own phone and snapped photos of the receipt and the email. I didn't want to believe it, but a wife's intuition, especially after 40 years, runs deep. I knew something was wrong, and I had to uncover it. My hands trembled, not just with anger, but with dread. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to watch my entire life collapse. I went to the garage. Julian's old SUV was still warm, the air thick with gasoline and that same sweet perfume from his clothes. I turned on my flashlight and checked every corner. Nothing unusual, just loose change and an empty bottle. Then I opened the glove box. My fingers brushed against something plastic and slick. I pulled it out, and my heart almost stopped. A tube of used personal lubricant, dried residue on the cap, a sticky, damning piece of evidence. I stood there in the dark, staring at it as if it were something vile. Julian and I hadn't been intimate in years. He always said he was tired, that age had dulled his desire. So, what was this for? The question echoed through my mind, every syllable another hammer blow. I forced myself to stay calm. I put the tube back exactly where I'd found it, wiped my hands raw with a napkin as if I could scrub away the betrayal clinging to my skin. Then I searched more carefully. Under the back seat, I found crumpled napkins soaked in that same floral perfume. Too strong, too unfamiliar, too wrong. The scent was vulgar, defiant, a loud declaration of infidelity. I took photos of everything, the lubricant, the napkins, like a detective collecting evidence. I closed the car, my body trembling under the weight of what I'd found. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table, hands shaking uncontrollably as I picked up Julian's phone again. I was almost certain now he was cheating. I checked his messages, all work-related, dry and dull. His inbox was empty except for that one email, sent and draft folders. Nothing. Too clean. Too perfect. He had erased everything. A master of lies, I thought bitterly. My rage hardened into something colder, a need for truth, no matter what it cost. The next morning, before sunrise, I was already awake. The image of that tube, the receipt, the email, they wouldn't leave me alone. They spun in my mind like a venomous carousel. I made breakfast, 2 fried eggs, toast, and strong black coffee. Julian came down looking disheveled and tired. He took a sip of coffee, set the cup down half full, and said, "I have an important meeting today. I'll probably be home late." A line I'd heard 100 times before. He didn't even look at me when he said it. He was so good at lying, so casual, so calm, it made my blood run cold. I forced a strained smile. "All right, be careful," I said, when all I wanted was to scream, "Where is the meeting, Julian? San Antonio again?" He patted my shoulder, a cold, distant gesture, and left. The door shut, leaving the house in that same thick silence. I washed the dishes slowly, one by one. The rhythm kept me from falling apart. But I couldn't just sit there. I needed proof. I picked up my phone and scrolled for a number I never thought I'd need, Mrs. Miller. Years ago, when I'd opened my bakery, she'd helped me through tough times. Once she mentioned a private investigator she trusted. "Juliet," she'd said, "if you ever need it, I know a man named Thomas. He's discreet and reliable." At the time, I'd laughed it off. I'd thought, I'll never need something like that. But now I had no other choice. I dialed her number, my voice trembling. Each ring sounded like a drumbeat of my anxiety. "Hello, Mrs. Miller," I said. "Can you help me get in touch with Thomas? I need him." There was silence for a few seconds, long enough to hurt. Then she spoke softly. "Juliet, what's going on? Did Julian do something?" I sighed, too ashamed to explain. "I just need to know the truth. Please." She didn't ask again. Mrs. Miller had always been a woman of intuition. Within an hour, I received a message from Thomas himself. "Mrs. Roberts, please don't worry. I will help you." It was short, but those words felt like a lifeline in a sea of deceit. At noon, I met him at a small cafe downtown, a quiet place with worn wooden tables and the smell of roasted coffee in the air. Normally, that smell comforted me. Now it only reminded me of the sleepless night before. I chose a secluded corner, away from prying eyes. When Thomas arrived, he looked like the kind of man who noticed everything. Middle-aged, short, sturdy, wearing a light blue shirt. His eyes were sharp, thoughtful, like he could see right through people. I handed him a flash drive with all my photos, the email, the restaurant receipt, the tube, the napkins. "This is all I have," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm not sure, but I think my husband is cheating on me." The words burned as they left my lips. They tasted like ash. Thomas nodded, silent and steady, reviewing the photos on his phone. His expression didn't change, professional, calm, unreadable. He took a small notebook from his pocket and began jotting down notes. And in that moment, watching him work, I felt something I hadn't felt in days: relief. Not because I knew the truth, but because I was finally brave enough to face it. "Mrs. Roberts, I understand," Thomas said gently. "I'll start following Mr. Roberts this afternoon. Don't worry, I'll let you know as soon as possible." I looked at him, trying to hold back the tears burning my eyes. "Thank you," I said softly. "I just want to know the truth, whatever it may be." Thomas nodded with a compassionate look, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I'll do my best. Go home, and don't do anything to arouse suspicion." I left the cafe and walked through the crowd, but I felt a loneliness I had never known before. 40 years of marriage, a lifetime built on trust, was now crumbling beneath my feet. I had put all my faith in Julian. I always believed he was a family man, someone who would stand beside me through every difficulty. He was my rock, my anchor. And now, here I was, hiring a stranger to follow my own husband. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I felt like a character in a bad movie, trapped in a drama I'd never auditioned for. That night, I sat in my bakery surrounded by the familiar scent of yeast and flour, a smell that usually soothed me, as I went over delivery invoices. Then my phone vibrated. It was a message from Mr. Thomas. I opened it, my heart pounding a mile a minute, the blood roaring in my ears. It was a photo of Julian wearing his favorite light blue shirt, entering a fancy restaurant while holding hands with a woman. I zoomed in on the image, and my heart stopped. It was Allison, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a tight black dress, heavy makeup, deep red lipstick, and her hair down. They didn't look like a father-in-law and daughter-in-law, but like a couple on a date. Their bodies leaned toward each other, sharing a secret only they knew. I sank into my chair, my hand trembling as I held the phone. Allison? How was this possible? At family gatherings, she and Julian always acted distant, barely speaking to each other. I realize now it had been a masterful act, a performance meant to fool me. Mr. Thomas sent more photos. In one, they were seated in a secluded corner, the table decorated with candles and flowers. Allison was leaning toward him, smiling, and Julian was toasting her glass with an oddly tender gaze. I saw that photo and felt a crushing pain in my chest. In 40 years, I had never seen him look at me like that, not even when we were young. When I was that girl from San Diego with long hair and a radiant smile, that was how he used to look at me, with genuine adoration, with a love I thought belonged to me. Now it was hers. In the middle of the night, another message arrived from Mr. Thomas, a video this time. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m. I put on my headphones, desperate to keep the secret contained, and pressed play. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. In the video, Allison leaned close to Julian's ear, whispering something that made him laugh loudly, a sound that was now a stranger to me. Her voice was soft and sweet, her eyes sparkling under the restaurant lights. Then they got up to leave, and Julian, ever the gentleman, opened the car door for her as if she were his lover. I replayed the video again and again, a self-inflicted torture. Each viewing was another stab to the heart. Allison, my daughter-in-law, whom I had treated like my own daughter, whom I had taught to make our family's traditional flan. And Julian, the man I had given my entire life to, the man I had built a family with. What were they doing behind my back? Behind Daniel's back? The questions were a tidal wave threatening to drown me. I saved all the photos and the video to a flash drive, noting every detail: date, time, place, even the name of the restaurant. My hands moved on autopilot while my mind descended into chaos. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe Julian and Allison were capable of something so low, so cruel. But the evidence was right in front of me, undeniable, a mountain of proof. I stayed in the bakery surrounded by trays of sweet pastries that smelled delicious, yet I felt as if my world was falling apart. I remembered the early days of the business, when Julian would help me carry sacks of flour, when we'd laughed together in that tiny kitchen, our dreams as big as the sky. Now it all seemed like a distant memory, a beautiful lie I had lived too long. The next morning, I stood in the bakery's small kitchen, holding a list of orders for a large hotel downtown. The smell of flour and vanilla, which always brought me peace, felt hollow that day, a comfort without meaning. As soon as I finished signing the delivery invoice, my phone vibrated in my apron pocket. I wiped my hands, and my heart sank when I saw it was another message from the detective. Just a short sentence, Mrs. Roberts. I'm sending you more evidence. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, though my hands trembled as I opened the message. A series of photos appeared on the screen. The first showed Julian in his usual gray shirt, leaving a law office near the main plaza. Beside him was Allison, wearing a beige office dress, her hair in a high ponytail and huge dark sunglasses that almost covered her face, a pathetic attempt at anonymity. They were walking very close together, not like in-laws, but like a couple. Their bodies spoke of a forbidden bond. In the next photo, they were standing in front of a 4-star hotel with gleaming glass doors and a gold sign. I zoomed in, desperate to find something that could deny what I was seeing, but there was nothing. They looked too natural, too comfortable together, as if they belonged to a world I was no longer part of. Then came a short video from Mr. Thomas. I pressed play, and my heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. A frantic drumbeat against my ribs. The shot was from a distance, but it was clear enough to see Julian and Allison on the 3rd-floor balcony of the hotel. His arm was around her waist, and she rested her head on his shoulder, her long hair flowing in the wind. And then, like a knife to the chest, I saw them share a quick kiss, brief, but enough to burn away the last spark of hope I had left. I replayed the video frame by frame, each image carving deeper into my soul, a slow and agonizing descent into hell. The curtain in the room opened slightly, and Allison came out, running into Julian's arms, her face lit up with happiness, as if she were a young girl in love. I slumped into a chair, gripping the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. Then came another message from Mr. Thomas. They also rented the room for the afternoon. It looks like they're staying the night. I'll keep an eye on them. I read that message over and over, my throat tightening as if invisible hands were strangling me. Just a few hours earlier, Julian had texted me, "Juliet, I won't be home tonight. I have to meet a potential partner from out of town. Get some rest." The tone was sweet and caring, just as it had been for years. But now I knew. It was all a lie, a well-constructed lie, a potential partner from out of town. He wasn't out of town. He was here in a 4-star hotel with our own daughter-in-law. I opened my portable hard drive and carefully saved every photo and every video. Each time I hit save, I stared at the image to make sure I wasn't dreaming. In the video, Julian's gaze toward Allison was unbearably tender. The way he caressed her hair reminded me of how he used to touch mine more than 30 years ago, when we were young and I believed our love would last forever. A promise whispered beneath a starry San Diego sky. Now, seeing this, all I saw were lies and betrayal. I remembered our family gatherings, everyone sitting around the table, the picture of a perfect family. Allison always sat far away from Julian. Sometimes she even looked at him with disgust. Daniel would joke, "Mom, I think Allison can't stand Dad. She avoids him like the plague." I had believed that too. I thought they just didn't get along, that she was trying her best to fit in. But now I understood. It had all been a farce, a carefully choreographed act of deception. They had fooled me, fooled Daniel, fooled everyone. I felt like a blind fool, betrayed by two people who had smiled in my face. People around town went about their lives, unaware of what was happening on that hotel balcony, but Mr. Thomas had captured the truth like a silent hunter, freezing my nightmare into still images. I replied, "Thank you. Please keep watching. I need to know everything." He answered briefly, "I will. Stay calm." That night, I returned to the house that had once been my home with Julian. It felt foreign now, a place haunted by ghosts and lies. I opened the dresser drawer and took out a thick envelope, my hands moving with grim determination. I printed every piece of evidence, photos of Julian and Allison leaving the lawyer's office, entering the hotel, standing on the balcony, and every frame of the video. I arranged them carefully, sealed the envelope, and hid it at the bottom of the drawer beneath old family photos. I looked at one picture of the four of us, Julian, Allison, Daniel, and me, taken at Daniel's birthday party a few years ago. Allison was smiling, hugging Daniel tightly, while Julian stood beside me with his arm on my shoulder, looking proud. Now, looking at it, all I wanted was to rip it apart, to tear their smiling faces out of my life. The next morning, just before dawn, I heard the front door open slowly. Julian staggered in, smelling of alcohol. "The partner was too difficult, Juliet," he said hoarsely, his eyes bloodshot as if he'd been up all night. "I had to drink a lot. I'm dead tired." I stood in the kitchen with a glass of water in my hand, watching him perform, every word of his excuse rubbing salt into my wound. "Rest," I replied calmly, my voice the same practiced tone of a dutiful wife. "You have to go to work tomorrow." He nodded, patted my shoulder as if nothing had happened, and dragged himself to bed. Minutes later, he was snoring peacefully, as if he hadn't just cheated on me, as if he hadn't spent the night with our own daughter-in-law. When I was sure Julian was asleep, my phone vibrated again. It was a call from Mr. Thomas. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if he feared someone might overhear him. "Mrs. Roberts," he said. "I recorded their conversation in the hotel parking lot. I used special equipment. They didn't even notice. I'm sending it to you now." My heart pounded hard, but I simply replied, "Thank you, Thomas. Send me the file." Minutes later, an audio file appeared in my messages. I put on my headphones, sat at the table, and pressed play. The first thing I heard was Allison's voice, cold, ambitious, and unrecognizable. "Dad, hurry up with that fake contract. I want to have that whole chain of stores already. I want that old hag out of the house." I felt a sharp blow to my chest and gripped the phone tightly. Then came Julian's voice, deep, confident, and cruelly familiar. "Don't worry about those papers. Juliet doesn't know anything. Leave it to me. She trusts me too much." It felt like a knife twisting in my heart. They weren't just cheating on me. They were planning to take everything I had built. The bakery chain, all my sweat, tears, and sleepless nights, every batch I baked, every delivery I made to keep my reputation alive, it had all been mine. Julian never once got his hands dirty in the kitchen. He never worked the counter or signed contracts with hotels. And now he and Allison wanted to take it all away, to kick me out of the house I had made a home. I almost broke down, but somehow I still had the composure to copy the audio to the flash drive where I kept the other evidence. I carefully wrote down the time and place, as if trying to keep myself steady in the middle of the storm. The next morning, as I made coffee in the bakery, my phone vibrated again. Thomas had sent another batch of photos, taken with a telephoto lens. In them, Julian and Allison were sitting inside his car, a thick pile of papers spread out in front of them. Allison had a red pen and was marking the document intently, while Julian, sitting next to her, nodded and smiled as if in full agreement. Thomas wrote, I overheard something. It seems they want to use a contact at the notary's office to make the transfer. I'll investigate further. I zoomed in on the photo. I could see the letters on the paper, though I couldn't read them. But I knew these weren't normal work papers. They were planning to steal everything I had worked for, step by step. I sat there among trays of sweet pastries that smelled so delicious. But I felt as if my whole world was collapsing. I reopened the audio file, put on my headphones, and listened to every phrase, every word they said. That wretched old woman. That's what Allison called me. I remembered the days when she had just joined the family, when I taught her how to make rice, when I hugged her like a daughter. I thought she was part of the family, that she'd be the woman who, along with Daniel, would build a future. And Julian, the man I had loved since I was a girl in San Diego, who swore he would be with me until the end. They had both made a joke of me, a fool who still believed in love and family. A regular customer came in then, Mrs. Peterson, who always bought pastries for her grandchildren. "Juliet, your bakery has been packed lately. Your chain of stores is expanding. I'm so proud of you," she said warmly. I forced a smile and replied, "Thank you, I'm doing my best." But inside, I was a wreck. I wondered what she would think if she knew the truth. Would she see me as a strong woman? Or just a fool betrayed by her husband and daughter-in-law? I wrapped Mrs. Peterson's pastries, said goodbye at the door, and sank into my chair, my hands on my head. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, a silent rage burned inside me like the fire in an oven, ready to ignite at any moment. That night at dinner, I sat across from Julian in the small kitchen under the yellow light that gave his face a strange, distorted glow. He ate and spoke in a monotone voice, as if nothing were wrong, as if the world wasn't about to end for him. "Juliet, I have to sign some important business papers this week," he said. "Maybe you should look them over. They're complicated." I picked up a piece of bread and pretended to take a bite, but in my head, I could only hear Allison's voice from the recording. "Dad, hurry up and sign the fake contracts." I knew he was testing the waters. He wanted to drag me into his dirty plan. I gave him a dry smile, the facade of a wife too tired to argue, and replied, "Yes, I'll look at them later. I'm tired now." He nodded and took a sip of wine, looking at me as if nothing were wrong. But I knew that behind that smile was a man ready to take everything I had built, a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Julian had a few more glasses of wine. His face turned red, and he started slurring his words about a difficult client he'd seen that day. I nodded as if I were listening, but inside, I wanted to scream, "Do you think I'm that stupid?" When he finally got up, staggering, and went to the bedroom, I cleared the table, every move slow and deliberate, containing the anger boiling inside me. He threw himself on the bed, snoring loudly, leaving his car keys on the nightstand, gleaming under the dim light. A siren's call to my revenge. I stared at them, my heart pounding in my chest. This was my chance, my moment. I entered the bedroom slowly, careful not to make a sound. Every step felt like walking between pain and resolve, between the past and a new, unknown future. I grabbed the keys, squeezed them tight, and went straight to the garage. The night was quiet, hushed, as if the world were holding its breath. All I could hear were the crickets outside, their chirping a soundtrack to my silent fury. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The weak beam illuminated Julian's old SUV, a silent accomplice in his betrayal. I opened the door. The smell of gasoline was still there, mixed with a strange, sweet perfume. I opened the glove compartment between the seats, and there it was, the tube of lubricant with a loose cap and dried residue on the edge, a monument to their infidelity. I held it in my hand, feeling like I was holding a dirty secret. It was clear they had used it again, as if it were confirmation that Julian and Allison were still playing their secret game, their twisted little dance. I took the tube of lubricant to the kitchen, placed it on the counter, and washed my hands with lemon soap. I scrubbed them thoroughly, as if to erase every trace of the betrayal I had just touched. The fresh scent didn't calm my anger, but it helped me stay focused. I opened the tool drawer and took out a tube of clear industrial super glue. The same, kind I once used to fix a chair at the bakery. It was a tool of my trade, now a weapon of my revenge. I carefully unscrewed the cap of the lubricant and filled the tube with the glue, drop by drop, until it was completely full. I wiped the nozzle, shook it gently to mix it, and tested it a little. It came out smoothly, just like the original lubricant. At a glance, no one would notice the difference. I smiled faintly, though a hurricane was raging inside me. This wasn't a game. It was the first step toward justice. I put the tube back in the glove compartment, adjusted the floor mat and the seat exactly as they were, and closed the car. Then I opened the trunk to check. There were only crumpled bags, an empty water bottle, and an unused condom lying in a corner. My heart skipped a beat, but I wasn't surprised anymore. I took pictures with my phone, adding them to the growing collection of evidence. Each image was another piece, another reminder that I couldn't let Julian and Allison get away with their lies. Back in the house, I put the keys back in their place next to Julian's alarm clock. I grabbed an old book and sat on the living room sofa pretending to read. The dim light fell on the pages, but I couldn't read a single word. My head was spinning. I thought of Daniel, my son, who believed he was living happily with Allison without knowing the truth. How could I tell him that his wife and his own father were betraying us? I thought of the bakery chain, of the 40 years of work and sleepless nights, of all the fights with Julian to defend my dream. He never really understood it, but I trusted that he supported me. Now I knew he'd just been waiting for the right moment to take everything. An hour later, Julian woke up and stumbled into the kitchen for water. He saw the keys on the counter and didn't suspect a thing. "Still not sleeping, Juliet?" he asked groggily. I smiled and replied, "No, I'm just reading a bit. Finish your water and go back to bed." He nodded, drank, and returned to the bedroom, snoring immediately. I looked at him as if he were a stranger. This man, the one who once promised to be with me until the end, was now planning to destroy what I loved most, but he didn't know that I had already started my counterattack. At dawn, I got up. The sunlight timidly filtered through the bakery window. I was in my usual kitchen, kneading dough, preparing flans and sweet pastries for a large hotel order. I pressed the dough with all my might, channeling my rage into every movement. When I returned home for breakfast, I made an effort to keep a calm face. Julian was already up, a cup of black coffee in his hand. I served him eggs and toast. "Julian," I said calmly, "I have to travel to Nashville tomorrow to sign a contract with a new partner. I'm sure I'll be home late. Can you take care of dinner?" I watched him out of the corner of my eye. He looked up, surprised, but in his eyes something was shining that wasn't concern. It was relief. "A big contract?" he asked, taking my hand with feigned tenderness. "Don't worry, go ahead. I'll handle it." But that spark in his eyes, that slight curve of his lips, as if a weight had been lifted, pierced my chest. He wanted me to leave, and I knew exactly why. I smiled and nodded. "Thanks. I'll call you if I get back late." He took another sip of coffee, then got up, saying he had to get to the office early. As he left, I noticed he had left his phone on the table, and the screen lit up with a missed call. The name that appeared was A.T. I frowned. My heart pounded. Allison Thomas. I was sure it was her. Before I could touch the phone, Julian came back, grabbed it in a hurry, and turned off the screen right in front of me. "Forgot it," he mumbled with a forced smile. And then he was gone. I stood there, watching the door close, feeling as if I'd just been slapped. He wasn't even bothering to hide it anymore. That day, I worked like a machine, delivering bread, signing invoices, smiling at customers. But my mind was only focused on Julian and Allison. I couldn't let them continue their farce behind my back and Daniel's. I needed more evidence, to hear from their own mouths what they said when they thought no one was listening. That night, I pretended to be tired. I went to bed early and told Julian, "I have to wake up early tomorrow to catch the bus, so I'm going to sleep." He nodded and gave me a pat on the shoulder. "Rest, Juliet. Be careful on your trip tomorrow." I lay down and closed my eyes, but I sharpened my hearing, alert to every sound in the house. Close to midnight, when Julian's snoring stopped, I heard him get out of bed quietly. The faint light from his phone glowed in the darkness. He left the room with it, thinking I was asleep. I stayed still, my heart pounding, then slowly got up and followed him on tiptoe. I hid behind the thick living room curtain and saw him standing in a dark corner near the window. He put the phone to his ear and spoke softly. "Yes, of course. Come over to the house tomorrow. We won't have to go to a hotel anymore. Juliet has to leave town to sign a contract and she'll be back late." I heard a soft giggle from the other side. Allison's sweet voice. "That's great, Dad. Finally, we can relax." Julian laughed, replying, "Yeah, come early. I'll be waiting." I stood there behind the curtain, feeling my blood boil. They weren't just cheating on me. They were planning to turn my house, my son's home, and mine into their meeting place. I returned to the bedroom in silence, opened a drawer, and took out Daniel's old recorder, the one I'd bought him for college to record his classes. I checked the battery, put in a new one, and turned on continuous recording. Then I hid it behind the bookshelf in the bedroom, right next to the headboard, certain it would capture everything. I carefully adjusted the cable and covered it with a family photo frame, the picture of the four of us at Daniel and Allison's wedding. Looking at it left a bitter taste in my mouth. Allison's smile, Julian's hug. Now I knew they were all lies. Before going back to bed, I checked once more that the recorder was working. I placed the frame perfectly to hide the cable, then lay down, pretending to sleep. Julian came back to the bedroom, threw himself onto the bed, and began to snore as if nothing were wrong. But my eyes were wide open in the darkness, more awake than ever. I reached for the clock and set the alarm earlier than usual. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to prepare. I was ready for the next step of my plan. I woke at 5 a.m. while it was still dark outside. Only the faint glow from the streetlights filtered through the window. The house was silent. The only sound was Julian's steady snoring from the bedroom. I stood in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee in my hand, staring at the skillet of oil already sitting on the stove. This was the last step of my plan. A simple smoke trap, but one that would be enough to expose the truth. I tied a thin string to the stove's igniter, ran it over to the window, and fastened it to a heavy old coffee can I found in the cabinet. All I'd have to do was pull the string from a distance, and the flame would ignite the oil, creating thick, black smoke, enough to alert the neighbors. I cracked the window by the stove so the smoke could escape, then tested it once. The smoke rose quickly, spiraling upward like a warning. I turned it off right away, checked everything again, and made sure I left no trace that could make Julian suspicious. Then I put on my jacket, grabbed my large purse, and pretended to leave for my trip. Before walking out, I went into the bedroom and gently shook Julian. "I have to go to the bus station right now," I said calmly. "I'm going to sign a contract. I'll probably be back late tonight." He opened his eyes and, in a sleepy voice, mumbled, "All right. Be careful, Juliet. Call me if you need anything." Then he buried his face in his pillow and went right back to sleep. I looked at the man I had once loved and trusted, now lying there, completely unaware of the trap waiting for him. I turned away, my heart heavy, but my steps steady. Instead of heading to the station, I crossed the street to Mrs. Peterson's house. She was my neighbor and a friend. When she opened the door and saw my purse, her face filled with concern. "Juliet, what are you doing up so early? Is something wrong?" she asked kindly. I forced a small smile. "Mrs. Peterson, can I stay here for a few hours? I need to watch my house." She frowned but didn't press further. She poured me a cup of hot coffee and gave me a chair by the window. From there, I could see my house. The same house, where Julian and Allison would enter, where the truth would finally reveal itself. Around 10:01 a.m., a taxi pulled up in front of the house. Allison stepped out wearing a light floral dress and dark sunglasses, as if afraid someone might recognize her. Julian opened the door, glanced around nervously, and quickly ushered her inside. I gripped my coffee cup tightly, my heart pounding. "It's time," I whispered, turning on the app on my phone that was connected to the hidden recorder in the bedroom. Sound came through my headphones. Allison's laughter, the clinking of glasses, heavy footsteps. Then Julian's deep voice, "All right, we don't have to hide in a hotel anymore." Allison laughed. "You really know how to pick your moments. The old hag is gone, right?" I bit my lip, holding back my rage as I heard her call me that. The old hag. With so much contempt. Then the bed started to creak, followed by sounds I didn't want to hear. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and told myself, "Just a little longer, Juliet, just a little longer." A few minutes later, Allison suddenly screamed, "What the hell is this? We're stuck!" Her voice was full of panic, almost sobbing. Julian growled, "Shut up! Wait, let me see." I smiled faintly, then barely tapped my phone screen and activated the smoke trap remotely. The string pulled tight, the stove ignited, the skillet of oil caught fire. Black smoke poured from the kitchen window in thick spirals, rising like an alarm signal. Mrs. Peterson gasped beside me. She looked out the window. "Juliet, your house is on fire." I pretended to be frightened, though inside I felt a strange, eerie calm. Neighbors began rushing out of their homes, shouting, "Juliet's house is on fire! Call the firefighters!" Mr. Miller, who lived nearby, quickly pulled out his phone to call the city fire department. I sat there, clutching my cup, my eyes fixed on the house. Everything was unfolding exactly as planned. Through my headphones, I could hear Allison's voice grow increasingly desperate. "Julian, do something! I can't move!" Julian's voice barked back, "Don't scream, I'm trying." But I knew they couldn't do anything. The industrial superglue I had replaced was already doing its job, trapping them in the most humiliating way possible. I pictured them struggling, terrified, and for a brief moment I felt satisfied, not because I was cruel, but because they had forced me into this. They wanted to take my bakery, my family, even my dignity. Now they were going to pay. The smoke grew thicker, curling upward as the neighbors gathered in front of the house, yelling in confusion. "What's happening?" someone asked. "Where's Juliet?" "She went out of town for work, that's what I heard," another replied. Mrs. Peterson, standing beside me, gave me a long look. Her eyes were suspicious but kind. She didn't say a word, just squeezed my hand gently. I could tell she sensed the truth, but I didn't owe anyone an explanation. The truth was about to come out on its own, and I was ready. Just 10 minutes later, the wail of a fire truck siren echoed down the street like a death knell. The red truck sped up and screeched to a stop in front of my house. I saw Daniel jump out of the driver's seat, wearing his fire chief uniform, his face tight with focus. My son's voice was steady and commanding. "Get the equipment ready, quick, there might be people inside." Watching him broke something in me. My son, so proud of his family, so loyal to his parents, was about to face the cruelest truth of all. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to whisper, "I'm sorry, Daniel." But I stayed still. I had no choice. The smoke from the kitchen continued to pour out thickly, making Daniel and his team believe it was a serious fire. He led the way with a sledgehammer, breaking down the front door. The sound of splintering wood echoing in the air. His teammates followed with hoses and extinguishers. From the bedroom, I could still hear chaos through the headphones. Julian's desperate shouts mixed with Allison's sobs. "Do something, Julian, I can't move." "Shut up, don't scream," he roared back. I bit my lip, gripping my phone tightly. The app kept streaming the live audio from the hidden recorder. They were trapped, helpless, exactly as I'd calculated. Daniel entered the bedroom, and I could only imagine what he saw. His own father and his wife, naked, stuck together on the bed, their faces pale with terror and shame. I wasn't there. But through the recorder, I heard Daniel's voice tremble. What is this?" One of the firefighters behind him whispered in shock. "Oh my God!" Another let out a nervous laugh, but Daniel snapped, "Silence!" That shout wasn't just to keep order. It was my son's last desperate attempt to hide his pain. The humiliation was no longer private. It was laid bare for Daniel, for his team, for the entire neighborhood. A firefighter came running back. "Chief, the smoke's under control. It was just a small oil fire, nothing serious." But Daniel didn't answer. I knew he was still frozen in that room, staring at what he couldn't believe. Outside, neighbors gathered in a crowd, pointing and whispering. "What's happening?" "It's Julian and his daughter-in-law," a woman yelled, her voice full of disbelief. "Oh my God, how could this happen?" Mrs. Peterson, still beside me, quietly took out her phone and began recording. She zoomed in on Julian and Allison as they writhed on the bed, their faces twisted in pain. Then she looked at me with eyes full of both pity and fury. "Juliet, you knew about this, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I just nodded softly, my gaze never leaving the window. Then Daniel came out of the bedroom. I heard, his heavy boots on the hardwood floor. From the recorder, Julian's voice rasped weakly. "Get everyone out of here. Close the door, Daniel." But it was far too late. The entire neighborhood had gathered, their faces full of disgust, their whispers like a storm of shame. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law caught in the act. Unbelievable. Poor Juliet. How did it come to this? The firefighters hesitated but had to act. They wrapped Julian and Allison in sheets, trying to cover their stuck-together bodies, and carried them out on stretchers. I could hear Allison's broken sobs and Julian's faint groans. "Please, do something. I can't stand it anymore," she cried. Julian mumbled, "Don't let anyone see us." But everyone already had. The neighbors' stares were harsh, some full of revulsion, some mocking, some pitying. They were carried out wrapped in thin sheets, surrounded by the murmurs of disgust. What a disgrace! Father-in-law and daughter-in-law, my God, how filthy! The ambulance siren wailed as it pulled away, leaving behind chaos. Amid the noise, I heard bursts of laughter. "What a show!" Mr. Miller shouted. "I can't believe there are two people this shameless in the world." An old woman shook her head and muttered, "Poor Juliet." I stood among the crowd, pretending to be shocked, as if I had just come running from the bus station. Daniel stood motionless in the yard, his arms hanging, his face pale as death. His teammates avoided looking at him as they quietly packed their tools. I knew Daniel wasn't just devastated by what he'd seen, his father and his wife together, but by the betrayal itself. The two people he loved most had destroyed his trust. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to tell him I was sorry for letting him witness something so awful. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, walking behind Mrs. Peterson, who silently accompanied me to the hospital. We sat in the third-floor hallway waiting, while I kept up the expression of a worried wife who'd just been told her home had caught fire. Hours later, a doctor came out, sweat shining on his forehead. He looked at me and spoke softly. "Mrs. Roberts, we managed to separate them. Fortunately, there was no serious damage. They just need some skin ointment." I nodded, pretending to be relieved, while my fingers brushed against my purse, where I had hidden 2 tubes of thick mustard I had prepared. "Thank you, doctor," I said, my voice trembling as I tried to conceal my real intentions. "Can I see them?" He nodded and led me to the nurse's station, where they handed me 2 tubes of ointment. The young nurse looked at me with genuine sympathy. "Ma'am, this is a very difficult situation. I'm so sorry." I gave a weak smile, and the moment she turned around, I swapped the tubes for the mustard I had hidden in my purse. My hands moved quickly and confidently, as if I had practiced this moment hundreds of times in my head. I walked into the hospital room with a tube of mustard in my hand, pretending to be concerned. "Julian, Allison, are you okay?" I asked softly. Allison was lying in bed, her hair messy, her eyes red, unable to look at me. Julian, still pale, mumbled, "Juliet, I can explain." But I didn't let him continue. I placed the tube of mustard on the table beside the bed and turned to leave. Just minutes later, a gut-wrenching scream echoed from the room. Allison was clutching her face, crying, "It burns! My skin is on fire!" Julian was writhing in bed, cursing. "What the hell is this? Who did this?" The entire hallway erupted in chaos. Patients and family members came out to see what was happening. An old woman whispered to her son, "It's them, the couple from that video this morning on the internet. The father-in-law and the daughter-in-law, what a disgrace." Another added coldly, "They deserve it." The doctor rushed into the room, shouting for the nurses to clean their skin and apply a neutralizing agent. But the humiliation of Julian and Allison was already public, impossible to contain. Mrs. Peterson's video of them being carried out on a stretcher had spread through the entire neighborhood and across social media. I stood in the hallway, listening to the murmurs around me, feeling as if the whole world was witnessing the downfall of those two traitors. When the crowd finally began to disperse, Daniel entered the room carrying a thick folder in his hand. I had called him as soon as the ambulance left, asking him to bring me the envelope with the evidence I'd saved in the drawer, along with the 2 divorce papers I had already prepared. He handed me the folder, his gaze empty, his lips silent. I opened it, took out the documents, and placed them on the table in front of Julian and Allison. Looking Julian straight in the eyes, I spoke in a cold, steady voice. 40 years of marriage end here. Sign these, then do whatever you want, as long as you disappear from my son's life and mine." Allison collapsed, crying, looking at Daniel. "Honey, forgive me. I made a mistake. Please, I beg you, forgive me." But Daniel just stared at her, his gaze hard as stone, and left without saying a word. Julian tried to grab my hand, his voice trembling. "Juliet, listen to me. I didn't want this." I pulled away, cutting him off. "Don't say anything else, Julian. You chose this path." He yelled desperately, "Juliet, please!" But the nurse came in and warned, "Be quiet, this is a hospital." I turned and walked away without looking back. In the hallway, I saw Daniel leaning against the wall, his head in his hands. I went over and placed my hand gently on his shoulder, but he didn't lift his face. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Why did it have to be Dad? Why her?" I didn't answer. I just hugged him, tightly, sharing his pain as deeply as my own. In that moment, I knew Julian and Allison had lost everything. Their honor, their marriage, even their filthy plan. But Daniel and I had lost a family. I could only hope that, with time, we'd both find peace. A few weeks after the scandal, my bakery was busier than ever. The little bell on the door wouldn't stop ringing. Customers came in and out with smiles and kind words. "Juliet, you are so strong," Mrs. Peterson said, holding a bag of freshly baked flan. "The whole neighborhood is proud of you for how you defended your family business amidst all that filth." I smiled and thanked her. People called me strong, but only I knew that my strength came from the broken pieces of my heart. Every time I looked at the oven, the same one I'd worked at with sweat and tears for 40 years, I remembered Julian and Allison, who had tried to take everything from me, but failed. And I was still here, with my bakery, with Daniel, and with a new life. Daniel moved in with me right after that day. He didn't talk much about what had happened, but I could see the change in him. He wasn't the cheerful, always laughing Daniel he used to be. His eyes looked deeper now, as if carrying a wound that would never heal. "Mom, I want to stay here for a while," he said the first night as he came in with his suitcase. "I'm going to help you run the bakery, talk to clients, whatever you need." I hugged him, feeling the warmth of the son I had raised, and simply nodded. I didn't ask anything. I knew Daniel needed time, and so did I. Every morning, we opened the bakery together. I prepared the oven and arranged the trays, while Daniel reviewed invoices and called hotels and restaurants. "Mom, the Grand Hotel wants to increase their sweet pastry order for next week," he called from the cash register, his voice calm but missing its usual spark. "All right," I replied. "Confirm the order. I'll prepare more dough." Those simple moments gave me a peace I hadn't felt in years. There were no more fake looks from Julian, no more sweet but deceitful tones from Allison. It was just Daniel and me, taking care of what we still had. Dinners were just the two of us now. We sat across from each other in the small kitchen, eating simple meals, sometimes rice with beans and chicken, sometimes just bread with coffee. "Mom, can you make me some flan this weekend?" he asked one night with a faint smile, the first I'd seen since the scandal. "All right," I said, relieved, "but you have to help me stir the caramel." He nodded, and in that moment, I felt we were slowly, but surely, beginning to heal. I started making time for myself, something I'd never done in 40 years. I joined a cooking club at the community center where women my age shared recipes and stories. "Juliet, you make the best flan in the neighborhood," one woman laughed, as I brought a tray to share. I smiled and replied, "It's a little trick I learned back in San Diego." I also began going to church on weekends. I'd sit quietly, letting the colored light from the stained glass windows fall across my face, and I'd pray, not for Julian or Allison, but for Daniel, and for myself, for strength to move forward. Sometimes I went for walks with Mrs. Peterson in the town square, listening to her talk about the latest neighborhood gossip. "You know, Juliet," she said one afternoon, her eyes shining, "everyone is still talking about Julian and Allison, but they say you're the one who won." I just smiled, not answering. I won, maybe, I thought, but the price was losing my entire family. Daniel began changing too. He became less quiet, more open. He told me about his work as a firefighter. "We put out a fire at the market yesterday," he said one night at dinner. "It was really dangerous, Mom, but luckily no one got hurt." I listened, my heart full of pride. "Please be careful," I said softly. "You're all I have left." Daniel looked at me with tenderness. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll never leave you alone." Those words were like medicine. They gave me back a little faith that even though I had lost so much, I still had my son, who would always be with me. One afternoon, while the bakery was full of customers, I sat at the cash register, watching the busy street outside. The bell on the door rang nonstop, and the warm smell of sweet bread filled the air. I looked at the trays of flan and pastries and thought about everything that had happened, about my whole journey. I had built this bakery with my own hands, from a girl in San Diego to a woman who had learned to endure. Julian and Allison had tried to take everything from me, but they failed. I kept my bakery. I kept Daniel. And most importantly, I kept myself. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing you more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments about the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.